One of the more difficult ideas or concepts for students to grasp in AP Seminar and then again in AP Research is understanding how to put perspectives on a particular topic into conversation with each other, both through our written work in terms of the individual written argument or the individual research report, or again in our academic paper in the AP Research class. So today we're going to take a look at multiple perspectives and putting them in conversation with each other through a metaphor known as the dinner conversation. What we're going to do is walk through first, what is a perspective? In AP Seminar and AP Research, a perspective is communicated through an argument. Now let's remember, there are multiple definitions for perspective. Let's face it, English is a funny language and there are multiple meanings for a lot of different words. But for this particular set of courses, a perspective is communicated through an argument. It's not simply my point of view, meaning I'm looking out the window and here's what I can see. It's more a perspective in that I believe looking out the window is a better vantage point than looking through the doorway. It has to be communicated through an argument. Here's an example of something that we could debate in an academic sense. Teachers should assign less homework. You notice that I didn't just say teachers don't like homework or teachers like homework. That might be a point of view, but this is more an argument. Teachers should assign less homework. This is open to multiple claims. I could claim that assigning less homework would be better for the mental health of students. I could make a claim that assigning less homework is better for the academic grades of students because there isn't as many missing assignments. So remember, an perspective is communicated through an argument. Now, multiple perspectives can be better understood if we think about people being invited to a dinner party. We're going to invite our guests and we want them to focus on a particular topic. So if I'm going to have a themed party where we're going to focus on a topic, I want to think about who do I want to invite. I want to make sure it's people who can contribute to the conversation. I don't want to bring anybody who has nothing to add to the conversation. I don't want to bring people in who don't understand the subject. I want everyone involved to be able to participate in the conversation. The way we're going to set it up today is we're going to identify a topic and then we're going to go through 4 separate perspectives on the same topic. Now, I want to start off by saying that different perspectives just means I look at it differently. They don't necessarily have to be in direct disagreement. While saying that the Los Angeles Lakers are the best basketball team ever, and someone else saying the Celtics are the best basketball team ever, those are different perspectives. Those are different arguments, but they're still related to the idea that basketball is a sport people enjoy. On the other hand, saying the Lakers are the best basketball team ever and saying, I hate watching basketball, those are different arguments. Those are not even related. So I can have different perspectives that are related to a similar take on the issue, or I can have things that are in direct opposition. But my writing is going to be better if I find perspectives that all relate to the issue in a meaningful way, but they're a different approach, not necessarily an oppositional approach. So for purposes of today, we're going to take a look at attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and education. It's something that we can all kind of understand. We understand education. We've had some experience with ADHD. We either have a diagnosis, or we know students who have a diagnosis, or we know that this is something that happens in schools. So this is a common topic that we can all take a look at. So let's think about who would be the guests that we would want to invite for a conversation about ADHD and education. I think the most logical guest at first is a teacher. This is clearly someone who belongs in the conversation. A principal, also someone else from the public school system or the private school system who clearly has to be involved with this particular issue. Logically, a parent would be involved. Parents would clearly have a different perspective than the teacher or the principal. And then a psychiatrist who would have an entirely different perspective than all of our other guests and yet their perspective on the subject makes sense so that they can assist the other three perspectives in understanding the issue a little bit better. For the purposes of what we're doing today, we're going to visualize a dinner table, and our topic is at the center of the table. And then we're going to invite our guests to sit around the table so that we get that they're communicating with each other. Now let's look at what I want to find out about each of my guests. What do I want to consider when I'm selecting my guest or selecting a source to contribute to my written work or to my presentations? Well, the title, I want to think about the name and necessary identification. It's not just for gender purposes, but for occupation services, knowing that someone is a doctor and they work in education, that indicates something to me also about credibility. We'll get to that in just a moment. So I want to think about, where are they employed? What's the field in which they work? Because that also speaks to credibility and relevance. The point of view, what is their perspective on this particular conversation? Then I want to think about credibility. How is this individual credible on this particular subject? A teacher is credible on the subject of ADHD and education. They clearly have to relate to that subject. But that doesn't mean a teacher is always credible. A conversation about why the Black Panther was such a financially successful movie, while a teacher may have an opinion, that teacher is not necessarily the most credible source on that particular subject because they don't necessarily have any expertise on the subject. Relevance. Why is their voice relevant to this particular conversation? Why is this individual relevant? Well, let's think back to the idea of choosing the parent. If it's the parent of a child who has ADHD, they are definitely relevant to the subject. But if it's a parent of a child who never had to deal with that, are they as relevant to this particular conversation? Then for each of my guests, I want to think about the similarity. What ideas or evidence does this person have that are similar to other ideas or evidence that have been shared? And what might be the difference? What do they have to say that is different? Do they disagree with or contradict a previous statement by another guest? Now, in my written work and in my presentation, it would be great if all of my guests had similarities and differences and I clearly communicated those connections, but I don't have to have a similarity and a difference for each and every guest. I just need that guest to be somewhat connected to the other guests, and that can be communicated through a similarity. This point of view is very similar to that point of view, while there are some differences, or this fact presented by this guest supports what was said previously by another guest. So what would it look like? Well, we would have a conversation. Oh, can you believe what he said? I completely disagree, and here is why. We can also agree. This is a great point. I completely agree based on my own work. And ultimately, I don't know why they're listening to him. He has no credibility in this discussion. These are the thoughts that I want to imagine happening between my sources to find out who agrees and who disagrees. So back to our example of ADHD and education. Let's take a look at what that might look like. Guest number one. Well, hey, it's me. It's Mr. Henry. What's my occupation? I'm a teacher. What's my point of view? Well, my perspective is there is an impact of ADHD on performance in the classroom. The students' behaviors are getting in the way of them performing well in the classroom, and that's my concern. The credibility. Well, I have multiple years of teaching experience. What's the relevance? I interact with ADHD most directly in a class setting, and it's happened every day of my educational career. So clearly I need to be involved in this discussion. And for the purposes of this, we're going to imagine it's a student that's in my class. So clearly I'm relevant to it. What's a similarity? I agree with Dr. Blazer about how to handle the measure without discipline. And what's the difference? I disagree with the parent about the child's behavior. Guest number two would be a principal, Dr. Blazer. She's an administrator. Her point of view is she'd like to see fewer detentions and referrals issued. Her credibility, much like me, she has several years as a teacher, as an administrator, and as a professional consultant. The relevance, she has decades of experience in dealing with ADHD issues on campus. And the similarity is she agrees with me that the intervention does not need to be done in a disciplinary way. On the other hand, she disagrees with the parent about how mean Mr. Henry is to her child. So if I look at these two examples, I can already glean some details about connections between the first guest and the second guest. And then I would want to fill in the same information for my parent and for the psychiatrist. If you were to do this in your classroom or to try to practice as you're trying to set up your individual research report, you might want to sketch out this image of the dinner table with the guests sitting around and filling in the same information. And you could invite as many guests as you want, keeping in mind that we're going to have limitations on the word count for the individual research report, which is 1,200 words, plus or minus 10%, or the individual written argument, which is 2,000 words, plus or minus 10%. So there's going to be a limit to how many guests I can have involved, but I would say for each of the perspectives that are being presented, I want to have at least 4 guests for each significant argument or approach. If we're going to look at less homework, as I mentioned earlier, less homework would be our common goal, and I have 4 guests that support or connect to the idea of less homework. And then if I wanted to have a counter argument in my paper, I would look at those teachers who say we should have more homework. So less homework and more homework would be separate. So as I learn this skill and I can practice it and build it out, then I can find multiple guests for multiple approaches to the issue. Some key elements to remember as we go forward: a perspective is communicated through an argument. There could be multiple perspectives which agree with a common goal or a common issue. We all believe public schooling should be better for students. Well, some might say that's through changing the classes. Others might say that's through eliminating testing. Those are not necessarily in disagreement with each other. They're just different ways to approach a common goal or issue. And it just means we can have different perspectives. The separate perspectives do not have to be in direct disagreement with each other. It just means they have to look at the approach or offer a solution that is focused on a different aspect of the issue we're discovering.